Alex, what's your question?
Quite a practical question, this one, but my dad's a lot better at this than me. What kinds of things would you say in general you should really be looking out for when you're kind of getting guided around a property for the first time?
George?
Obviously, the condition of the building, it's a very obvious answer, really, but you know, when you're walking around a property, quite clearly, even though a surveyor is going to do a non-intrusive survey as well, the thing to go around with someone experienced like your dad or something is going to be brilliant. A lot of people I know take their builder friends around with them as well. Anyone with any even half-decent DIY experience is going to be able to spot problems quicker than someone who doesn't do DIY. I mean, the main things to look out for are things like structural movement, which is a biggie. You know, any kind of cracks in the outside walls, blatantly obvious, is going to be a howling problem. Things like any visual areas of damp coming through walls and wall surfaces. Pulling away of the internal walls with external walls, that happens quite a lot if you've got an area of a little bit of movement. When you look at the internal walls, if there's any kind of, wherever the junctions are, you know, between wall, floor and ceilings, that's generally where you're going to get some structural movement in a property as well. It's really difficult when it comes to electrics and plumbing. Really tricky. When you're walking around a house, you're thinking, is it in the right area? Is it near the right schools? How far is it away from work? Where's the nearest bus stop? And the last thing you're thinking about is whether the wiring needs to be redone or not, to be honest with you. And that's why it's worth having someone alongside you like that who just say, do you know what, it's an old property, the wiring's a bit shot, it probably hasn't been touched for 30 years, we're going to have to budget a couple of grand to do that. I mentioned it before, but it is a biggie. Things like your boiler system. You know, we never kind of MOT or test our boilers. You know, we get them fixed when they break, but we don't do any general maintenance on them ever. Landlords do for rental properties because they've got to get them certified every year. But if you're a homeowner, people just generally don't do that. And if it's 10 years old, honestly, the components in that boiler are probably so knackered and tired. You know, some plumbers will come around and go, oh, it's fine, mate, it works, so it's fine. But actually the heat output from something like that might be kind of 50% efficiency from what a new boiler might be. So it is that general stuff, damp, structural movement, then getting into the services and electrics. And then really it's about the general condition of the building. So if the kitchen's tired, obviously, from a personal taste point of view, you might want to change it. If the bathroom's looking a bit kitchens and bathrooms are the biggie. They're the big things that people spend most money on in their houses. You come into a new house, you want a nice new bathroom, and you want a nice new kitchen. Even if the condition of the one that's there is not bad, you're probably going to end up changing it. So I would just list all of those things out as much as you can. Sometimes it's worth getting your hands on a previous surveyor's report and taking it with you. You can find them online. And if you take around, if a surveyor's done a report for another house, at least it's got all the headlines that they're going to be looking for. And it's worth you just looking for the same things when you go around it yourself. You'll end up having to pay for a survey anyway, but it's just worth knowing that you've got it in your head what those additional costs might be before you make an offer. Because obviously you put an offer in on something, it'll get accepted, then you get the survey done. And then you have to go back to them and say, well, actually, can I knock 5 grand off because the surveyor said all of this? And it becomes a real debate then. Because they'll start to forget it, I'll go to the next person who's going to offer me the same amount as you. So it's worth having some of that knowledge before you even put your offer in.
And from a negotiation point of view, obviously being armed with that knowledge, particularly if you've taken a professional with you, whether it be electrician, plumber, then it really does help you negotiate. From a standpoint of fact, rather than just saying, I want to offer you £3,000 or £4,000 less. It does obviously depend how hot the market is, because you can do all those clever negotiation tactics, but if there's a queue of other people willing to pay the price, then it's wasted effort. One of the other things to think about, obviously get very focused on property and defects, but you're going to be living there as well, so visiting the property at different times of day, looking at the traffic noise, different times of day, looking which way the garden faces, the rooms face.
Where the sun is.
Absolutely.
That's another big one. I know people that have bought properties and they've gone, the garden doesn't get any sun. It's north facing and we just get this massive shadow cast from the back of the house. And you think, God, you just spent 250 grand buying a house and you didn't realise that.
You can put defects right, but if the neighbours aren't right, that is harder. And we've done surveys at Rightmove, and you know, the importance of your neighbour, absolutely critical. And we asked people, how many of you actually did meet your neighbours before you agreed to buy? And very, very small percentage.
Are there other things that will always be undesirable in a property that people should be careful of? Very tiny bedrooms or nowhere near public transport? Or are there key things that you might not think of if you were buying for the first time, but that might make it harder to resell?
From a resale point of view, I think that's really crucial, because you can get so caught up with the emotion of buying your first home, and isn't it exciting, and I can hang this picture there and it's great. But resale is quite a good thing to have in your head, because if there's something that you think, I kind of don't like that, but whatever, I'm just too excited, it's really worth it. I think, quirky things like in some old properties, you might get, if you're in a purpose-built maisonette, for example, a first-floor flat, if you have a private garden, there can be a staircase to go out down to the garden. It doesn't matter for you, but somebody who might want to buy it with children, that's a no-no. So it's things like that. And the tiny bedroom, it can work, but not if you want to, maybe even rent it out or sell it as a sharer. It's fine if you're in a couple. If you've got one double bedroom and a tiny bedroom, it's never going to work for sharers. So resale, I think, is always good to have in your mind. If there's something you're unsure about that can't be put right, I think even interior design-wise.
There'll be certain things that are out of your control, though, but make sure your conveyancing lawyer checks it. Like, you don't want to buy a house where they're building like HS2 or something, some major infrastructure project that you weren't aware of when you put your offer in. I mean, that's quite extreme, but I do genuinely know of people who have bought a property and not really gone through the searches properly, and then all of a sudden a massive housing development is being built next door, which is a good thing because it's providing the housing that the industry needs. But when you've got a building site next to you for 3 years when they're building a skyscraper, it's a bit of an exaggeration. This might not be what you want.
Assuming you can avoid all of those pitfalls, are there any rules of thumb about whether it's better to buy a smaller property in a really good location or a bigger property in perhaps an area that's not quite so up and coming?
That's an interesting one. I mean, location is obviously a huge part of that. So as soon as you talk about a good location, you're going to pay a premium for it. It's as simple as that, because most people want to live there. That's giving you some security and stability. And you're not really playing the market. You're not predicting what's the next place that's going to kind of shoot through the roof. In places like London, there's always conversations about the next area, and it's mind-boggling how that can distort prices. And there's some areas that I go to and I think, well, hang on, when you're talking about this place turning around, I'm thinking this is going to take like 20 years for this area to turn around. But some will turn quite quickly in 3 or 4 years. So location's everything. The size of the size of the house that you buy really is a personal issue, because buying something small means that if it needs doing up, it's not going to cost you an awful lot of money to do it, because there's not a lot of work to be done there. If you buy a bigger property, it's going to cost you a lot of money to do it. And so either of them can give you the same percentage added value. So the added value on something really depends on where it is and what it is you're building. Now, generally, if I was going to put an extension on a house, for example, in W1 in London, the build cost is probably going to be relatively the same as one in W3, to be honest, roughly. It's not going to cost you a lot more money unless there's access issues and things like that. So the build cost can generally be the same, but it's about the resale value per square foot. So people ask me a lot about things like basements. Should I build a basement under my house? And the build cost generally is
massive.
Yeah, well, it's huge, but also it can be, if you're building a basement in one area of London, another area of London, can generally be the same.
Yes.
Per square foot, but the resale figure is massively different. Yeah. So you've really got to think about the added value on what it is you're trying to do.
How do you work out where the up-and-coming areas are where you're going to look very smart?
Have you got a little ball that you can just pull out of your bag? Where's the crystal ball?
Obviously look for early announcements of transport links. We'll leave HS2.
No, that was a bit extreme, but you know what I mean.
But depending on what markets you're in, but generally commute distance is a key factor for people, whether you're in London or elsewhere. So it might be road links or major investment. So if an area is getting external investment, then you will see people want to live there. It's a more pleasant place to live. More employment comes in. So employment is absolutely a massive factor in the projections for London. Massive growth in employment, which is going to underpin house prices there. On a more sort of, that's at a strategic level. On a more sort of tactical level, if you've missed the major news, you can look for high streets being done up, trendy shops appearing, cafes, restaurants, bars. So people like to live in nice places with nice amenities. So you can see an area turning. London, yes, they turn more quickly because people have got an awful lot of money to invest and try and look for a return. But the adage also is you're best owning the worst property in the best location rather than the best property in the worst location.